بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. All praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, most beneficent and most merciful. I want to start by thanking you for taking the time to join us today. It is important that we take those opportunities to join together, make dua together, and learn together about our responsibility to support our brothers and sisters in Gaza and to stand against oppression. So I do appreciate you taking the time to be here to participate in this conversation and this discussion. My name is Samar Baswait. I've been asked to moderate today's conversation, and alhamdulillah, we're blessed to have with us two great speakers who are going to be talking about an important item related to the situation that's happening in Gaza. We have been talking about it for quite some time, and we need to continue to discuss it and continue to learn how can we play a part in lifting the pain and suffering of our brothers and sisters. Today we're going to be talking about the situation in the West Bank. So some kilometers away from Gaza, but it is part of the conflict or the oppression that has been taking place for years. And anybody who actually is fixated on what happened on October 7th and just starts the clock from that point misses all the history that has led up to it. We hope that the discussion today about the West Bank and what's happening on the West Bank and the history of the situation in the West Bank will provide more light and more knowledge about the situation collectively that will help you and aid you in talking about this with your colleagues, with your neighbors, with your friends, with anybody who is willing to lend an ear. And I want to stress how important this work is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Nahl, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wal maw'izati al-hasana wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan." Invite to the path of Allah with wisdom and good sound advice, and debate with them with truth, with kindness. The power of word is important. The power of talk is important, especially in a democratic society where public pressure plays a huge factor in changing the course of history. And if you need any evidence that public opinion is making a big difference, see how much the oppressing parties are trying to quiet people down and shut down the debate. If you want another piece of evidence, watch the number of videos coming out of Gaza encouraging people to continue to talk about Gaza and continue to speak up and try to change public opinion, put pressure on politicians to do the right thing. So inshallah, the time you're taking out of your busy day today will go a long way on helping the cause. So I'm pleased to hand the mic over to two very knowledgeable brothers about the topic. Spent years advocating for this, learning about it, to play a big part in making a difference, inshallah. So to my left is Brother Basil Hattoum. He's a Palestinian Canadian who is active in the Muslim community in London. He has previously served on the board of the CPSA, Canadian Palestinian Social Association, where he focused on political advocacy and education. More recently, he founded an initiative focused on educating the Canadian public about Palestine through free, high-quality resources. In the past few weeks, he has spoken at various mosques about the importance of using social media to advocate for Palestine. And to his left is our dear brother, Muhammad Awawda, who's currently a policy analyst in cabinet affairs in the government of Canada. He's also the advocacy coordinator for Hikmah Public Affairs Council, a local public affairs group in London here, which focuses on combating Islamophobia. Muhammad has previously worked as a humanitarian and political affairs advisor at the Palestinian Mission to the United Nations. His master's research was focused on UNRWA, the rights of the Palestinian refugees. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to them. I just want to give you an overview of the program. Inshallah, we will lend the mic to them. They're going to have an interactive discussion, educational conversation for about 40 minutes. And then we will take a pause, invite you to ask any questions you might have to our speakers. And we'll have Sister Kamila and Brother Ali here passing around pieces of paper where you can write your questions and bring them to the front, where we might consolidate some of the questions together just to save time. We'll do that for about half an hour. And then we will join together in prayer. We'll pray 2 rak'ahs of qiyam, make dua for our brothers and sisters who are facing the oppression in Gaza, and then we will end the program, inshallah. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Basil and Muhammad.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Can everybody hear me okay? Perfect. So if it's anything that you heard from our dear brother Samir of our introductions, Muhammad to my left is much more knowledgeable about this issue than I am, and has spent a lot of time studying this and working in this. And so for the first part of our program, inshallah, I'm just going to be asking him a series of questions. It's something that we haven't really done before in this Gaza on Fire series, but we're going to try it out tonight, and hopefully you find it interactive and insightful. So my first question for you, Muhammad, is why are we talking about the West Bank while Gaza is still under attack?
It's essentially, I don't know, it can be summarized into two ways. The first one being a really simple way to put it, that this is an occupation, and an occupying power usually does not differentiate between different parts. So what is happening in Gaza is also essentially one form of occupation, even prior to October 7th. And what is happening in the West Bank is another form of occupation. The more kind of in-depth answer in this is the fact that this year specifically has been the worst year for Palestinians in the West Bank since the United Nations started keeping record of certain indicators in 2005. So in terms of settlements, for example, this year has been, or has set a record for the number of settlements that have been built in one calendar year. Currently, there are over 650 or 675,000 settlers inside the West Bank and East Jerusalem, which is essentially a quarter of the population of the Palestinians in the West Bank. The number of Palestinians killed, even prior to October 7th, there were at least 183 Palestinians killed by Israeli forces up until October, just in this year alone. Until today, this number has risen to 473, or 400, actually today it increased a little bit. Out of those 470 something, 120 are children. So this is just in this year alone. And if you look at kind of the reasons for that, is that the Israeli forces have essentially killed over 130 civilians in Jenin city and the Jenin refugee camp alone. So you're talking about just one specific area where kind of a quarter, or possibly, a quarter of the people that were killed this year in the West Bank are from that specific area. And the numbers are very small when you compare them to what is happening in Gaza right now, but it's important to understand that what is happening in Gaza is a state of war, and the numbers are will be much bigger, unfortunately. But in the West Bank, it's kind of a slower and slower, but in a way more sinister way of occupation, because there are methods to kind of inflict violence upon the Palestinian people in different ways. There is what we call essentially the direct violence, which is what we see in Gaza. It's directly inflicting pain upon a certain population. That is our most typical form of violence. But then there is indirect violence, which essentially are things that you cannot really pinpoint, but you can kind of still experience, and that's how your rights are denied. So for example, the number of checkpoints that are present at the West Bank, the number of settlements, the fact that Israel controls every basic resource that flows into the West Bank. They control the economy. And up until October 7th, there were 4,400 or so prisoners from the West Bank, and some are from Gaza. But they're held in prisons within the West Bank and somewhat within Israel. So out of those 4,400, for example, you're talking about around 200 or 300 children that are held. Some are held without a fair trial. So this is a more in-depth answer for why we're talking about the West Bank, because the occupation does not operate in a vacuum. They have occupied all of Palestine, and this is the reason for that.
Right. And to an audience that hasn't really been paying attention, they may have been thinking that before October 7th, that there was some semblance of peace for Palestinians or some sort of security, right? But you've lived in the West Bank, and so can you tell us a little bit about your personal connection there?
Yeah, so there is an illusion of somewhat of a normal life, but in reality there isn't. I'm from Bethlehem. It's 10 minutes away from Jerusalem, 15 minutes max. If there is no occupation, if there is no checkpoints, I can just hop in a car, drive, and within 10 minutes I'll be in the old city of Jerusalem. And sometimes you can pass by certain places within Bethlehem, and you can see the Dome of the Rock in front of you. So it's very close, but it's not really that simple. There is, as I said, if we just consider the checkpoints by themselves, there are over 39 or 40 permanent checkpoints. Those are permanent with dedicated buildings that you have to physically go in, and you have to deal with Israeli soldiers over there. There are 140 flying checkpoints. Those are essentially, they're kind of labeled, they're not permanent, but in a way they are. They just move around, basically. There are over 350 roadblocks. Some of them are permanent within the West Bank alone. So when we talk about essentially a peaceful reality, there really isn't. And this is just in regards to checkpoints and movement. If in normal circumstances, if I were to go from Beit Lahem to Al Khalil, it should take me around 20 minutes. But in reality, it takes me around 45 minutes to an hour because there are segregated highways. This is reality for Palestinians and the West Bank, where there are highways dedicated for Israelis only. There are highways that you're not able to go in if you don't have the right license plates. So the solution for the Palestinians is actually to just find kind of a back road, and sometimes they have to kind of carve something through the valleys and the mountains to kind of make way for you to actually make it to different cities. So in Beit Lahem, for example, we have something called Wadi Nar, which is considered one of the most dangerous places to go because it's in a really steep valley with a lot of sharp curves. So just because Israel has segregated the highways, Palestinians have to resort to kind of dangerous methods of transportation. And add to that the checkpoints, and then add to that the settlements, where you have extremist settlers that are armed in every way possible. So it's really, there is no peaceful reality for the Palestinians. I don't think I can put it in any other way.
So, as somebody who grew up in Canada, I've never lived under occupation. You described to us the measures, like the checkpoints and the settlers. Can you describe what it feels like to live under occupation? Like, what's the emotion that comes with that?
So, for Palestinians there, it feels a little bit of a way of resistance to exist under the occupation. Because you're dealing with a number of things. As I mentioned, you have the checkpoints and the settlements. But there is the more indirect forms of violence, as I mentioned. So for example, so the West Bank is divided into 3 areas. It's Area A, which constitutes a very small number of the West Bank. It mostly includes the major cities, so Beit Lahem, Ramallah, Al-Khalil, Nablus, Jenin a little bit. Those are considered Area A, and it falls under the authority of the PA, the Palestinian Authority. Then you kind of go deeper into the West Bank. You have areas B and C. Those are Area B is partially under Israeli control, and Area C is under full Israeli control. Area C constitutes around 60% of the West Bank. And in reality, there is no authority for the PA, and there is no division of power. It's mostly Israel controls everything. And for us in Area A, which is seen as a little bit more of a better reality, Israel still controls the basic needs. So the water, for example, Israel controls that fully. So you might have water flowing into your city for a day or two, and if it fills the water tanks that are on top of the building, then you're good. But the moment that you use it, you basically have to wait for some soldier inside of Israel to decide whether to open the water on the city that you live in or not. So sometimes it can go up for a week or 2 without water, and you have to find alternative solutions. So sometimes the neighbors might, for example, give you might share with people within your community, but at the same time, you're still dealing with that reality. The economy, for example, it's still, you go into a store and everything that you see is essentially, you do have some Palestinian products, but Israel has a monopoly over what goes into the Palestinian economy. So there is that kind of reality for Palestinians, that even the economy itself is not controlled by the Palestinians themselves.
So we've seen recently, and this has been in the news, of Canadian citizens who are in Gaza and their experiences with dealing with the Canadian government and global affairs and trying to get out of that. As a Canadian in the West Bank, when you're living there, how does that change your experience compared to somebody without that passport?
It doesn't really. In the eyes of the occupation, you're just a Palestinian, regardless of how many passports you have. So in my case, I have a Palestinian passport and a Palestinian ID. I have a Jordanian passport and I have a Canadian passport. The moment that I go there, first of all, it starts off when you want to go there. You're not allowed to fly in, regardless of whatever passport you have. Palestinians are restricted from flying into Tel Aviv. So you essentially have to go through Jordan. Once you go through Jordan, if you give them your Canadian passport and you're already registered in the Palestinian civil system, they just give you the Canadian passport back and they ask you for the Palestinian ID. This is their way of kind of ensuring that, you recognize that whatever you do with your life, you're still a Palestinian and you're still under occupation. So there is that aspect to it. Then the fact that, let's say that you get a passport and you want to cross into Jerusalem, for example. You're still Palestinian, but you have an American or a Canadian passport. They still won't accept it. So you have people that come in for tourism, and some of them can be Palestinian without a Palestinian ID, without any connection to Palestine, for example. They can go in. But the moment that you get that Palestinian ID and you want to go into Jerusalem, which is occupied under international law, there are severe restrictions on that, and there is kind of a way for that. So it is, regardless of whatever your situation is, the moment that you're born a Palestinian and you have that ID and you have that label, then essentially that's something that you have to live with. And it's their way of ensuring that Palestinians are humiliated, regardless of whatever you do in your life, whatever passport you get. At the end of the day, they just look at you as Palestinian, and it doesn't really matter. And I think this is one of the misconceptions about the West Bank, that it's seen as a little bit more of a better reality, when it's not. It's just I don't know. I feel like it's the occupation. You feel it in every way, even just going there to visit.
So you talked about visiting Jerusalem. Let's talk about an ideal day under no occupation. You're in Bethlehem, and you want to go pray in Al-Aqsa. What does it look like with no occupation?
Literally, go into the car, drive for 10 minutes, and be there. It's literally as simple as that. You barely get on the highway. So it's similar to, for example, you want to get from here into Lambeth. It's technically seen as something separate, but it's not. And Bethlehem actually, as a governorate, falls within in the past, it fell within the Jerusalem one. So it's supposed to be very, very simple.
So you can probably guess my next question is, we come back to the reality today. What are the steps in order for you to take that 10-minute drive to pray in Al-Aqsa?
Almost 2 months. So it starts off the day that you're there. So for us, for example, when we applied for permits, we can't just go in, even though it's technically the East Jerusalem is a West Bank, a part of the West Bank, but it's still occupied. So it's for us, we went, let's say, I don't know, July 1st, right? We went the next day to an office, what they call it, the coordinator's office. And you go in, you apply for a permit to enter Jerusalem. And that permit can be given in many cases for humanitarian reasons. But the term humanitarian is, very, very carefully worded for them. So you apply, let's say you apply in July 1st. It took us 2 months to get the permit. We were there exactly for 2 months. It took us 2 months to get the permit. They called us. They said their permit is ready. It expires in 2 days. So you only have 2 days to use it. And that permit allows you to go into kind of historical Palestine. And you go in. It has restrictions. So first of all, you're not allowed to drive your car into there. You have to have an Israeli license plate. You're not allowed to stay there overnight. It has a curfew. It tells you from 5 a.m. till 10 p.m. The moment you stay a minute longer, they can deny you future permits. And there is actually an exit permit that you need to apply for when you want to leave the West Bank. So they might deny you that exit permit if you're kind of late, because they deem you as a security risk the moment that you're late. You're not allowed to go to certain cities. So on the permit itself, it says you're not allowed to go to certain cities within the green line. So it's very restricted. Even if they give you the permit, you're still facing a lot of restrictions.
I want to shift to something that a lot of people may have seen, but they don't really understand the actual reality of it, which is the wall, the so-called apartheid wall. How does it actually affect your day-to-day life as a Palestinian?
It's very hard to explain. So for us in Bethlehem specifically, you see the wall cut through the most integral part of the city. And my parents used to tell me that there was a very nice neighborhood in that area. And whenever we go, that area is just, all you can see is military jeeps. You'll see soldiers kind of around that area. And you'll see a watchtower. That's essentially all that you will see. But that's kind of the visual aspect. But then there's the actual reality of it, which as families were broken completely. Some kind of, the wall cut through some family areas. So some families ended up in the West Bank, other families ended up in essentially still the West Bank, but on the other side of the wall. Businesses that were set up for generations have been ruined because of the West Bank. Because of the apartheid wall. It cuts through Palestinian neighborhoods in a way that essentially just cuts it off from other parts of the West Bank completely. And then it's built on stolen land. So there is that aspect to it. And a lot of Palestinians kind of are somewhat resisting that fixture. So in Beit Lahem, they set up a hotel. It's called the world ugliest hotel. And it's set up by Banksy, actually. And it's the view that you'll see is just the wall. So it's set up in a way to kind of show the ugly reality of the wall. And Beit Lahem is a tourist city. Like, this is, especially around this time, that's where we kind of like want the people from outside to come in and see. And the hotel itself, you'll see fixtures from, for example, people broke parts of the wall. So they started putting that in the hotel. The windows, like the moment you look up, you'll see a watchtower with an automatic machine gun, like aiming down like at you. So that's the reality of not just people in Beit Lahem, but it's essentially all across the West Bank. And someone that I was talking to once said that there is, this is a form of ibtila for Palestinians and for us as people.
Can you translate the word ibtila for people?
It's a test by Allah, and that for us as Palestinians living in the West Bank, you see that test every single day. Whether it's the wall, the settlements, the settlers, and the situation that you see right now in the West Bank. And our job as Muslims, as Palestinians, as Arabs, and even as peace-loving individuals, is to make sure that we overcome this. And as I said earlier, this is an occupation that does not value Palestinians in any way, shape, or form, especially the settlers, the government, the individuals that are there. This is an occupation of the entire area, whether it's through the apartheid wall, whether it's through the settlements or anything that resembles the occupation. Essentially, it's those are the things that you see in your day-to-day life.
So for me, as somebody who's lived in Canada my whole life, I haven't really experienced living under occupation. Something that really helped me was just visualizing it and trying to find videos on YouTube and that kind of thing to sort of see what does it actually look like. So I'm going to show a video here, just 3 minutes. It just shows a team of journalists who decided to compare what it's like driving through the West Bank as an Israeli citizen and as a Palestinian. No, it's not. Yep, give me 1 second. Thank you, sir. Let me know when you can see that. Good? Okay.
June the 5th marks 50 side of the last remaining Palestinian land. Since then, illegal settlements have been expanding throughout the occupied West Bank, changing the landscape. Al Jazeera's Mila Ibrahim and Willem Marx traveled to the occupied West Bank. Killer journeys can be so different.
We're losing.
You can see Israel has built a separation wall that blocked the road for Palestinians. We have a Palestinian dedicated. Well, they want to go for one.
You can't see it? No? Okay. That's okay. Heading to another one. So I'll tell you the, I'll just explain to you the video. So basically this team of journalists decides to go into two separate vehicles where they take one vehicle through the roads that are built specifically for Jewish settlers and through the roads that are built for Palestinians. And in one case, with the Jewish settlers, it takes them about 25 minutes where they go through one checkpoint and it's very quick and they only get asked a second question because they're journalists and they're filming. And for the Palestinian, it takes them 55 minutes to travel like a third of the distance. And they don't even continue the video because it takes so long just to get to the street where the checkpoint exists. And they have no idea how much further it's going to, how much longer they're going to be there because the checkpoint could be 2 or 3 hours or more where they're stuck at the, so it's just shows you a side-by-side comparison of the difference. So another way to show the difference, I was also looking into some of these things because, like I said, I haven't lived that reality of occupation. And hopefully you can see these. If not, I will describe them again. But the Human Rights Watch put out a report that covers about 240 pages of evidences and proofs of a system of apartheid that exists. No? Okay, let me try tightening this and see if that helps. Otherwise, I'll just describe it. Okay, that's all right, we can describe it. Yeah, that's fine. So, Human Rights Watch put out a report about 240 pages long. They put it out in April 2021. And for those of you who are not aware of who Human Rights Watch is, they're an organization that writes these reports about human rights violations all over the world. They don't accept funding from governments or anything like that, and so they try to be as unbiased as possible. And the conclusion they came to was that Israeli officials were committing the crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecution. And in February 2022, Amnesty International came out with a similar report, this time 290 pages of evidence and details showing that, again, they were committing the crimes of apartheid and persecution. In the Human Rights Watch report in particular, they worked with a team called Visualizing Palestine, who creates these graphics that are very easy to understand and help people, see the side-by-side comparison of what's going on. And so they show the example of two people, Noah, who is a Jewish citizen of Israel, born in East Jerusalem in a settlement, compared to Zayd, who is a Palestinian resident, also born in East Jerusalem. And so you see that the only difference between them is that Noah is a Jewish citizen of Israel and Zayd is not. And so they pose these questions side by side, and they say, is their status in East Jerusalem secure? And so in Noah's case, absolutely, it's secure, and she can come and go as she pleases, and she'll always have a place in East Jerusalem according to Israeli law. In the case of Zayd, if he decides to leave his home, for example, to study abroad, goes to an international university, or even leaves East Jerusalem for a certain period of time, then Israeli officials can decide that, you know what, you no longer have a connection to this place, and so therefore you're not allowed to return. And so their status side by side is very evident. Another thing that they created these side by side comparisons, not just East Jerusalem, but also in the West Bank. And so in the case of people born in the West Bank, we talked about the fact, can you hop in your car and drive to Jerusalem? And for a Jewish citizen of Israel, absolutely, it's quite easy. And in fact, the settlements, the roads are built specifically to have you avoid Palestinian areas, and they're very new, and they're separated. Whereas we heard from Hamad the situation for a Palestinian. So we're seeing this discrimination side by side. And I really encourage you, if you can, to go take a look at this Human Rights Watch report and these side-by-side comparisons that Visualizing Palestine created. Because when you see these things side by side, there's almost no way that you could stop yourself from comparing this to a South Africa apartheid system, or from a Jim Crow South, where if you were black, you weren't allowed to sit in certain restaurants or sit in a particular place on the bus. And you look at these things and you say, there is clear discrimination happening in the West Bank. And it's so clear and it's so obvious that it's almost unbelievable that it's been allowed to continue for as long as it has. And so as you continue on this journey of learning of what's going on in Palestine, I really encourage you to take a look at the West Bank. And I know that the series is called Gaza on Fire, but as we mentioned earlier, the systems of oppression are evident. It just takes a little bit of research to figure out how exactly they work so that you can explain it to people. And when you explain it to people in a way to say, person X can do this and person Y cannot, and the only difference between the two is which family they were born into, essentially, becomes very evident that there's clear discrimination against the Palestinians in the West Bank, and this system of apartheid and persecution continues till today. We have a few more minutes. I know you had a couple of slides, but do you want to just explain them? Okay, I'll do that.
Does it even show? Oh, no. So within the West Bank, and also within all of Palestine specifically, there is sort of essentially a charge for being a Palestinian. And that can be evident when you examine the legal system of Israel itself. So within Palestine, you'll see two legal systems. There is the criminal civil court system, which is designed for Israelis only. And then there is the military legal system, which is designed for Palestinians specifically. And part of that legal system, there is a component of administrative detention for Palestinians, which is one form of indirect and somewhat direct violence against the Palestinian population. So administrative detention, for those who are unaware of what the term means, essentially is the Israeli Defense Forces labeling someone as a security threat, whether it's for a Facebook post, whether it's for throwing rocks at a tank, whether it's going out on a protest. There is a form of detention for Palestinians that essentially means that you can be held without charge, without a fair trial, without ever seeing a court, and you will be put in prison for 6 months that can keep renewing for months and months. The conviction rate for Palestinians in that is 99%, which, you know, in any case, whatever you do, you're still guilty for absolutely nothing. The number of minors in the Israeli prisons continues to rise. Up until October 7th, as I mentioned, there are 183 minors held in Israeli prisons, 75% of which are held in an administrative detention form, so without any fair trial. So this is one form, one way how the occupation continues to affect Palestinians on daily life. And lastly, I think we can wrap it up with, are there laws to the occupation? And there are specific laws to the occupation. Even as an occupier, you have specific things that you need to respect. Transferring of populations is illegal under international law. The Geneva Conventions, specifically the fourth one, prohibits the transfer of populations from the occupier's land into an occupied area. So the fact that there are 700,000 settlers in the West Bank, this is not an act of, you know, something happened and somehow we ended up with 700,000 people. No, it's a deliberate move to displace the Palestinian population and replace it with an Israeli majority. and if we look at the numbers, 700,000 individuals right now is the same number of Palestinians who were displaced in 1948. So if we look at the trend, there is a form of ethnic cleansing that is occurring in the West Bank. And it's occurring all around Palestine. And that is, when we talk about international law, it's not just because we want to bring it up, because there are serious violations of international law. And in the West Bank, it's really, really easy to point it out.
Jazakallah khair, Basil and Muhammad, for that very informative conversation, dialogue. I picked up a number of key messages and key learnings and key follow-ups that I have to do, and I'm sure all of you have as well, inshallah. I'd like to open it up for questions from attendees. If you have any questions, please write them down, and we will try to consolidate them and have the speakers respond to them collectively. So Brother Ali and Sister Kamala is passing around some pieces of paper. Please write the questions, that we'll collect them, inshallah, and bring them forward. But until maybe we get our first question, I'll pose a quick question to the speakers. You've referenced a lot of things. A lot of times people get challenged when they use the term ethnic cleansing or genocide or violation of international laws. What resources do you advise us to go back to? I know you mentioned some, Basil, but if there are resources that people can go to increase their knowledge about the history, about the situation, so when they're challenged, they can back it up with facts and stats.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got something. I can take this one. So in terms of resources, there are different forms, and it depends on what you like. So if you're a reader, if you like books, I would recommend a book by an Israeli historian by the name of Ilan Pappé. It's called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, so it should be pretty easy to find. It's very well researched. There's another book that I'm actually currently reading now by an author by the name of Rashid Khalidi, called The 100 Years War on Palestine, and he basically breaks down the history of what's happening in a series of 6 declarations of war against the Palestinians. So I found that very insightful. If you're not much of a reader and you're just looking for something a little bit quicker, a little bit easier, Amnesty International, when they put out their February 2022 report, produced a 14-minute video that has some history in it, but also details a lot of the breakdown of what's actually happening in the West Bank today and how they've come to the conclusion that the crimes of apartheid and persecution are occurring. I would recommend that, especially for the students, if you've got students in high school or in university, take a look at those Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International reports. I know they seem daunting at first because of their length, but there's a lot of useful information in there, and there's a lot of resources that are cited at the end of those reports, which you can always take a look at if you're writing a book report or if you're doing some kind of school project or anything like that. There's a ton of information in there. So I would start with some of those videos, maybe from Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and then I always encourage people to read. So I would start with the Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, again by Ilan Pappé, or 100 Years War by Rashid Khalidi.
Jazakallah khair, Basil. So we have a couple of questions about as Muslims living in the West. And people, or actually people in general living in the West, how can we contribute and help the people in Palestine beyond protest, du'as, and donations? Any thoughts, suggestions?
Our influence in the West is directly tied to our civic engagement. So getting involved in the political side. We can go out on protests as much as we want. We can write and share things as much as we want. But the reality is there are really important things that can be achieved through engaging directly with the government and with officials. So one of the first things that would be influenced, apart from the political side, is the humanitarian aspect. Funding to UNRWA, for example, fully dependent on the government supplying funds to an important organization. Previously, under different governments, the funding to UNRWA was cut. Lately, it's been decreased a little bit. This is something extremely important that we can influence. In terms of the language on the occupation, it wasn't until 2 or 3 weeks ago that Canada came out with a statement calling for a ceasefire. And the language that was used was very, very carefully worded. However, it was essentially the result of the entire community, and not just in London, but at the national level, collectively sending letters, engaging with MPs, engaging with their representatives, directly calling for a ceasefire. Here in London, through Hikmah, we met with essentially all the MPs. We met with political party leaders. We had direct conversations with them multiple times. This is the way to kind of get results in this area. I know a lot of us are kind of, I would say, fed up completely with the political process, and rightly so. But at the same time, that is our only way to influence the situation in Palestine by directly engaging with them. They are the decision makers, and there is a way for us to reach them. We just have to carefully follow that.
And just one follow-up question. What are some of the trusted organizations that people can donate to ensure that the funds get through? Yeah. Okay. So it is a tough question. So this one has been coming up regularly. We've heard about the blockade of any aid or support getting into Gaza. NGOs are having a hard time getting through, yet a lot of Muslim organizations, trusted ones, are collecting funds and trying to get them through. A lot of them are on standby. And the reason why they're collecting funds ahead of time is because when they open the gates, you can't start scrambling to collect funds. You have to collect funds in advance. So organizations, I think like Islamic Relief, ICNA, and there are others out there. I think we've had a lot of history with them, and if they say they have ways of getting the money through, or they are waiting until there is an opportunity to get the money through, I would trust them and I would give them my money to actually do that. Some individuals who have family there are getting money through, but that's limited, and that's on a personal, one-on-one basis. But I would trust the organizations that have historically fulfilled their commitment in Palestine and elsewhere, but right now it is very limited, and I think it's up to the big NGOs and government aids to get through, and I think some of them are getting through right now. I know it's one way to help and support, but there are other ways, as Muhammad mentioned. So inshallah, hopefully we'll know more, we'll find out more, we'll have other ways to get aid and support to our brothers and sisters. And I want to highlight one big thing. It is going to take years to rebuild Gaza, and God willing, it will be rebuilt. So if you are wanting to donate financially but don't know how and where, put that money aside, and when the time to rebuild comes, there will be a lot of opportunity to rebuild it and ease the suffering that the people have felt. It is going to be very long process and very expensive to do so. So your money will be well spent in that front. Do you have a couple of questions related to settlers? If you can, please explain about the settlers. You mentioned that Israel controls a lot of resources, like water and whatnot. How is that impacting settlers, if any? And how do they incentivize them to come and leave their countries, whether they're in Europe or the US or Russia or whatever, and to actually move and live in Palestine? And also a question kind of related to it is, when you talk to some of the individuals here, some Zionists, they're clueless about what's happening in Palestine. Do you believe that the settlers who live in the West Bank know what's going on and know that it's an apartheid system, or are they completely removed from the reality that you described?
So in terms of how it affects the Israelis, So in terms of the natural resources, so water, electricity, even roadways, the Israelis have a completely different reality. And I've seen it directly. Our house in Bethlehem is exactly 3 minutes away from a settlement in East Jerusalem. So if you sit on the balcony, you can directly see it. Sometimes, like if there are celebrations, you can even hear what is happening in that settlement. There is a separation barrier, but it's still exactly 3 minutes away from us. When, for example, electricity runs out, 3 minutes away from you, you can see everything with full lights, and if anything, more lights than ever. In terms of water, for example, some Palestinians actually choose to live near settlements because they have direct access to water lines that go into the settlements themselves. So the Israelis have a completely different reality. They have free-flowing water. They have electricity that can never essentially run out. The roads are segregated to make it easier for them. So in terms of reality, they're not really living the same kind of life that the Palestinians are living. Whether they're clueless or not, and then I'll get to the point whether the people, like how we can counter the narrative here. But whether they're clueless or not is not something to even consider. Because the settlers there are motivated from an ideological perspective. They're not there because it's the most beautiful place on earth. They're there for a reason. And for example, the West Bank, they on purpose refer to it as Judea and Samaria. There is a reason for that, because they believe it's their biblical land. So there is nowhere to reason with that. And the settlers themselves, they're seen as the most extremist forms of Israelis that live in that region. The settlers that you see consider even Israel itself to be somewhat very liberal in its treatment with the Palestinians. In 2014, a bunch of settlers, that belong to a group called the Hilltop Youth, they decided for absolutely no reason to break into one town. It's called Jomaa. They went and burned an entire family while they were asleep. The father, the mother, and the girl were all killed on scene. The baby, his name is Ali, survived with severe burns. Until this day, he still lives with his family, with his uncles. But till this day, half of his face is just gone because of the burns. These are the doings of the settlers. In this year alone, the number of communities that were attacked by settlers, the number of Palestinian communities, were at least 93 communities. Some communities were attacked multiple times. So Hawara, for example, settlers broke into the Hawara area with guns, with kind of stopping every single Palestinian car that goes in and getting the Palestinians out of the car. They terrorized every single aspect of Palestinian life in Hawara. And the IDF came hours later and just basically just added on to that. In Tormusaya, for example, the settlers killed an American citizen who was there to get his wife and leave back to the US. So the settlers themselves are a form of they're an extension of the IDF, to put it very, very mildly. They're an extension of the IDF, if not more extreme than the IDF. So there is no reasoning with them. Most of the settlers are fully armed, especially right now. And when they have ministers like Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, who are settlers, they just keep essentially being more motivated. In terms of reasoning with the people here, there is, settlers and settlements and blockades, apartheid, all of that, they're illegal under international law. And if there is any tool that you can use to argue with anyone, there is nothing more beneficial than using international law. And Basil mentioned a lot of tools, but there are tools that are very, very simple. The Geneva Conventions are very simple to point out. And there are organizations in the West Bank and in Israel that can exactly pinpoint where those violations are. You have Beit Salem, is an Israeli organization. Israel itself does not believe in it because it focuses on the rights of the Palestinian people. You have Yesh Den, which also focuses on the rights of the Palestinian people. There are a number of other organizations and NGOs that focus on the rights of Palestinian refugees and the fact that settlers have stolen Palestinian land. So there are resources that you can use in arguing with them and proving your point.
I want to mention something if I can, because we often get this narrative of, oh well, these are extremist settlers, and you know the IDF will punish those who break the law. I want to read you something. This is directly from the Human Rights Watch report. And so they say between 2005 and 2019, the police closed 91% of the complaints tracked by the Israeli human rights group Yesh Din on reporting settler violence against Palestinians without indicting anyone. We're not talking about someone being convicted. 2005 to 2019, 14 years, and a 90% rate of walking away without even being charged with a crime, let alone convicted. And so when you hear these, when you get this pushback to say, well, these are extremists and they'll be taken care of and they'll be charged and the IDF will stop them, the evidence just does not support that in any way.
That's very telling, inshallah. Just one final question, maybe a quick answer, and then we'll wrap up, inshallah. What if you go into Palestine as an Arab, for example, Egyptian, how would you be treated?
There are differences. So there is a lot of xenophobia and racism within the Israeli society. So there, you will still feel the occupation itself. But your reality would still be slightly different than the reality of Palestinians with a Palestinian ID. In many cases, if let's say that you're of Egyptian descent and you have a Canadian passport, you can still go into Jerusalem. No one is going to stop you for you most of the time. You can still fly in. You might be questioned, possibly, but at this, you still have those ways of kind of going into Jerusalem or flying in or commuting, or even sometimes you can rent a car with an Israeli license plate. It's still different than what the Palestinians are facing. And the Palestinians with a Palestinian ID, those are the ones that are of most concerns to Israel. Because Israel is mostly concerned with making sure that the Palestinians that are there hate every aspect of being there. It's not concerned with the Arabs and the Muslims that are outside, because they're not essentially, they're not a roadblock in their way to colonize the entire area of Palestine. So it's maybe possibly now a form of normalization and their way of trying to make themselves look better by making things a little bit easier for all visitors. In reality, that's not true. And once you're there, you'll realize that the life of Palestinians, things like this, the things that we talked about, the reports, everything cannot even explain it. I think this is the tip of the iceberg. And once you're there, you'll see the harsh reality of being in Palestine as a Palestinian.
Okay, so I've asked just to say one last thing. A bit of homework for you. Show of hands, who here has Netflix? About half the group, so maybe you can get together with somebody that didn't have their hand up and watch this. So there's a movie, it's a short movie, it actually premiered in the Toronto International Film Festival a few years ago by a Palestinian producer by the name of Farah Nabilsi, and it's called The Present. It's a short film, it's about 24 minutes long, and the plot of the film is basically that a man decides that he wants to get an anniversary gift for his wife. And in the 24 minutes, you get to watch what it's like as a Palestinian going to buy a gift for your wife from the store. So a bit of homework for you. Again, the movie is called The Present. It is available on Netflix, and I encourage you to do some homework and watch that.
Jazakallah khairan, Muhammad and Bas. I really want to thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge and your expertise, and everybody else for taking the time to attend and for your engaging questions. This is an important time in history. I think that history will judge us on what have you done when oppression is so blatant. What steps has each of us taken to try to speak up against it? And we see great examples, people from all religions, all stripes, standing up and saying, no, not under my watch and not in my name. So I do hope that we've been equipped with some tools and some resources to speak up and to be part of the solution, so that when history judges us in the future, they will actually see people who have stood up against oppression. And I want to stress the importance of speech and speaking up. It is a just cause, and I think all it needs is a platform. All you need is the knowledge and the skills to be able to convey the truth, and the truth will prevail. We know it will, and we just ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us part of that path, or part of the way, and a wasila, and a means for that truth to prevail. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر